Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. On this episode, we're taking a closer look at an unlikely trio: Russia, Japan and North Korea, and their ongoing issues regarding diplomacy, defense and potentially disastrous pacts. If you thought your high school prom was awkward, you've clearly never witnessed the spectacle of international relations in East Asia. On one side, we have a still simmering dynamic between Russia and Japan, with both nations trying to find common ground without stepping on each other's toes over old territorial disputes or fresh strategic disagreements. On the other hand, North Korea is in the mix like the uninvited party crasher who arrives with their own nuclear playlist. Let's get to it. Here is a look at our latest report to help you find out more about this story.
It is no secret that Japan and South Korea are close with NATO. While not members of the alliance, given the North Atlantic part of the name, they are both crucial partners in their respective region. Many see these two as a counterweight to two of Russia's closest friends, China and North Korea, and of course Moscow itself, which means that the Russians also have to keep a close eye on their flank.
The United States and its allies have now apparently set a course for including the Asia-Pacific region in NATO's zone of interest. Numerous narrow, closed, American-controlled associations of military-political orientation are being created here.
So much so that leaked plans accessed by the Financial Times show that Russia had drawn up offensive plans meant to target military and civilian infrastructure in Japan and South Korea in the wake of a war with NATO. The plans focused on training Russia's military officers between 2008 and 2014. They outlined 160 potential targets, including the nuclear complex in Tokai, Japan, and military manufacturing sites in South Korea's Busan. These plans are still apparently considered relevant to Russian strategy today. Russia's attention on the Indo-Pacific can also be seen in the numerous drills it has been holding with China. While it accuses NATO of readying for a war, Moscow has been quite eager to play at war games of its own. NATO itself is of course aware of these plans and is developing its own to counteract any Russian designs. There has also been serious talk about raising defense spending from 2% of GDP to 3% among member states. Though this man has already said that 3%, currently only reached by a handful, is far too little.
You know, they're in dangerous territory. I think it should be, they can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%.
NATO is considered by many experts and leaders to be the most successful military alliance in history. The coming decade might just determine whether this opinion will stand the test of time.
And now, as always, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. First, let's talk about Russia and Japan's new diplomacy. Well, these two neighbors have been glaring at each other over the Kuril Islands dispute since basically forever. Recent moves suggest a cautious effort to reset the tone. A Carnegie Endowment analysis notes that Moscow and Tokyo are testing new diplomatic channels in the face of shifting global alliances. Now, is this a sign of actual progress or just political theater on the world's biggest stage? It is hard to say, to be honest, but if Russia and Japan were a couple on a reality dating show, would be in that segment right before the final rose ceremony, where each side wonders, am I about to get ghosted for someone else? The tension remains real, but there is also genuine curiosity about what they can each bring to the table, whether in the form of energy partnerships, trade deals, or even a thaw in historical grievances. On the surface, that sounds almost heartwarming. Two major powers historically at odds, gradually warming up to each other in a seemingly earnest effort to patch things up. Could this be the buddy comedy moment of global geopolitics we've been craving? Well, not so fast. Because whenever Moscow flirts with new friends, especially in East Asia, Pyongyang inevitably sneaks into the conversation like a raccoon rummaging for leftover pizza in your trash can. Reports suggest that the Moscow-Pyongyang partnership could throw a giant wrench into Japan's carefully laid Indo-Pacific strategy. Essentially, Russia sees North Korea as a strategic wildcard that can keep other powers on edge constantly. That goes particularly for the United States and its allies, and Kim Jong-un, in turn, relishes any chance to boost his regime's profile while picking up handy resources or diplomatic cover from a major global player. So how does this budding bromance between Moscow and Pyongyang threaten Japan? Let's lay it out. Japan's Indo-Pacific strategy relies heavily on close collaboration with the United States, Australia, India, and other regional stakeholders. The vision is to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific, which, in simpler terms, means preventing single-state dominance, be it from China or anyone else, over strategic waterways and trade routes. But if Russia and North Korea are trading arms, sharing technology, or coordinating security agendas, it presents a direct challenge to Japan's security calculus. All of a sudden, Tokyo has to contend with not just one nuclear-capable wildcard on its doorstep, but two. Ultimately, these developments underscore that East Asia is at a crossroads. The Russia-Japan relationship is no longer just about Soviet-era grudges over who owns which patch of land in the Pacific. The takeaway here is that the chessboard is in constant motion. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Marta Bartarigo, head of the Undergraduate Learning and Teaching program at the International Business School in Budapest. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me here.
So let's begin first with the leaked plans that Russia had when it comes to wreaking havoc across Japan and South Korea in the event of a conflict with NATO. How relevant do you think these plans are today?
I think these exercises could suggest a willingness by Russia to expand potential conflict zones beyond Europe, testing maybe NATO's ability to respond on multiple fronts. So I think maybe NATO may need to reassess its Indo-Pacific partnerships, particularly with Japan and South Korea, to deter threats in the region. But I think before we go deeper into the topic, maybe we should understand the Russian foreign politics and that kind of actions with two different kind of political theories. Could I evaluate these ones if you are interested?
No, of course, please do.
Okay, so first, I think we have to understand that there is a so-called hegemonic stability theory, which means that we have a hegemon in the system, the so-called single dominant power who can provide global regional stability by maintaining order and enforcing norms. After the post-Cold War era, we could see it was mainly the US. But now what can we see? That the Russia's military exercise can be seen as a challenge to this hegemonic order, especially considering that what is going to happen to Ukraine and that kind of secret, negotiation, which is going to be led by Putin in Slovakia. So if we put it to a deeper and a more broadened perspective, that kind of challenge can be seen as mirroring the Russian foreign policy to the Indo-Pacific Rim, where exactly what we are going to see that how they are challenging the US supremacy. The other one, how we could interpret that activity is some kind of counter-hegemonic behavior, because Russia is a so-called revisionist power in this sense, which means that Russia would like to somehow change the circumstances in this region. What they are doing here exactly, that they seeks to erode the US dominancy by creating a so-called multipolar world. And we know exactly since the 90s, this is on their flag in foreign policy rhetorics, that this is what they want to achieve hand in hand with China. So it can be considered as a new way of alliance building in this counter-hegemonic approach, deepening the ties, for instance, with North Korea, or having a deeper alignment with China. So this is a classic example of these ones. The other ideas of this hegemonic theory is how China is rising in this region, and how, the Russians can interpret as a threat to the Chinese rise. Even though we know that they are friends, however, we must be aware of the fact that their friendship has some kind of limitations. And again, it can be considered as some kind of practical approach in their foreign politics, how they could use the Chinese friendship, meanwhile, how they could be there in the main focus point to show that not only the Chinese are responsible for the new world order in that kind of sense.
One quick question here, because we, of course, will be evaluating the dynamics of bilateral relations in the region in a moment. But first, do you think that it is of any significance that these particular plans originate from the years 2008, 2014, which was back when Russia might have had its delusions of grandeur when it comes to military power, delusions that have since been dispelled to a large extent on the battlefields of Ukraine?
I think that kind of plan can be interpreted as a part of its desire to reclaim a regional hegemonic status in Eurasia. So by extending its military posture to East Asia, Russia demonstrates its ability to project power beyond its immediate sphere of influence. And not only here, but of course in Ukraine, we could see the same interpretation. So I think, therefore, I told you before, it's some kind of mirroring what we could see here. We have Russia, and nearly the same is happening in Ukraine, which is happening right now in Asia-Pacific, or is going to happen. And therefore, maybe a better example to show how Ukraine is getting closer to Asia-Pacific to understand what could happen when we are talking about it.
This is a very interesting point there, because this has, according to some analysts, been exactly the way of thinking that happened in the Japanese government. When they saw what's going on in Ukraine, they said, look, this could be happening in our territory, because this is about Russia undermining the fundamental principles of international law. So do you think that this has been the main tenet which has driven Japanese foreign policy ever since they saw what was happening in Ukraine, perhaps even earlier than that?
You know, Japan belongs to the Western securitization system. So it's a very close connection to the NATO. They have different kind of programs together. They share different kind of security issues. All in all, what we can see here right now, that Japan, as one of the biggest ally of the USA, you know, tries to redefine its own security perspective, facilities, and opportunities. So facing a lot of threats coming even from the Russians, it means that they have to, you know, modernate and somehow newly modernize their security facilities. Speaking about these ones, that kind of pacifist ideas of the Japanese, that they are really far away from having an army since the Second World War. Nowadays, we could see since Shinzo Abe that it's changing. And why is it changing? It's not only because they could see there was a shift in the American foreign policy, but there are new threats, and that these new threats need new, I would say, weapons. So the Russians' activity here and the Russians' activity in Ukraine, for them, could be, you know, very, very dangerous if we would like to understand why the Kuril Islands are especially important in that kind of sense, and why we could understand or must understand what kind of development is going to be done in Japan regarding a missile defense system, which has been built, but they stopped it in 2020. And nowadays they reconsider, you know, having a new impetus or putting a new impetus to this missile defense system, which they called it Aegis. This Aegis shore system was or is a very important defense system, which is a land-based version of the American weapon technologies. And also we have to take care of the fact that not only these systems were modernized or has been modernized lately, but they have an existing PAC-3 system, which is a Patriot Advanced Capability System, which could, protect and particularly designed against ballistic missiles. And this is how they could, you know, reinforce the Japanese position in the region.
So now, how does North Korea's involvement in Ukraine, play into all this? Because previously Japan was mostly focused on containing China. They considered China to be the main challenge to their position in the region, because if China chose to attack Taiwan, this could influence their position both in terms of security and trade. But now we have North Korea, which not only is behaving as North Korea has been for quite a while, which is to say, in a very irresponsible manner, but also you have their alliance with Russia. So do you think that Japan might be looking towards North Korea now and saying, okay, this is the more immediate threat, because they are now perhaps less aligned with China and might actually turn out to be the rogue actor in the region, particularly because of their military cooperation with Moscow?
Yeah, it's true. So North Korea is a threat, so it can be considered as a threat to international security and regional security. And it's not only a bad point for Japan, but for the other countries within the region. And how Russia comes into the picture. As I was talking about, that Russia would like to force a multipolar world. And in the multipolar world, there are 5, 6 big actors who is the leader of different kind of regions. And since now, as you were talking about, that their alignment with the Chinese are not really the deepest, the Russian could see some kind of, free ways how they could interfere to North Korea and how they could be the one to put a leash on it. So in that kind of sense, even though, and again, I would like to reflect to the Ukrainian situation and what is happening right now with any kind of possible peace talks, even though they are going to have some kind of maybe peace talks and negotiation on Ukraine, this is another, field where they could show that they are a big power, they matters in the world, and this is how they could save their profile for the international community if they could, somehow put a leash on North Korea in that kind of sense.
And very quickly now, you've mentioned Ukraine. So should countries like Japan also emphasize that the message from the negotiations should be do not reward the aggressor, because this will have an impact elsewhere?
Yes, exactly. So the peace talks should be about some kind of content which brings peace for everyone and do not, put some kind of any other revenge into the system. So when we are talking about the Kuril Island, when we are talking about Taiwan, or when we are talking about any other, territorial disputes, it couldn't, create some kind of, precedent for the future. So I think this is one of the most important which they have to pay attention in the future.
After all, the autocrats of the world are watching this closely. Marta Bartarigo was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
And now moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Ukraine has refuted Slovakia's accusations that it has refused to engage in talks concerning gas transit. Meanwhile, Hungary has condemned Kyiv's decision to halt gas flow from Russia, saying it has exacerbated Europe's economic challenges.
Both Slovakia and Hungary are not letting go of their feud with Ukraine concerning Kyiv's decision to end its gas deal with Russia. Slovakian, Ukrainian and European Commission representatives were to meet in Brussels on January 7th to discuss this issue, but the Ukrainian delegate reportedly had to stay in Kyiv over urgent energy issues. Kyiv proposed to hold the meeting online, but the Commission instead suggested to reschedule it. The meeting was initiated by Ukraine itself to address Slovakian Prime Minister Fico's threats to halt power exports to Ukraine and cut support for Ukrainian refugees living in the country. Early on that same day, Hungary's foreign minister blamed Kyiv's decision to halt Russian gas transit for the 20% spike in natural gas prices in Europe. Slovakia, Hungary, as well as Austria are all reliant on Russian gas purchased through Gazprom Bank, which is an entity currently under Western sanctions.
Trust in President Volodymyr Zelensky is dropping among Ukrainians, according to the latest poll by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. As the war nears its 3-year mark, the president has seen a 7 percentage point drop in trust compared to October.
The conflict in Ukraine seems to be exacting a toll on Volodymyr Zelensky's public perception. According to the survey, as of December 2024, 52% of Ukrainians say they trust the president. 39% said that they did not trust him, and the rest could not decide. While trust indicators have worsened over the year, the majority of the population continues to see the president positively. Zelensky is more popular in the western and central parts of the country than in the south and in the east, which have been the most affected by the war. Trust in Zelensky had initially soared right after the Russian invasion, as the president decided to stay in the country to lead the defense. Prior to the war, he had been grappling with growing unpopularity.
Russia's IT market may be in trouble, although it is currently on the rise. 3 years after major Western tech companies left the country, experts say that this growth is likely to be unsustainable.
In the wake of the exodus of Western companies, Russia's local IT firms were eager to step in and fill the void. The result was a delivery of critical IT solutions all across to various sectors of Russia's economy. This momentum continued as far as into 2024 and saw an impressive 63.2% growth rate year-on-year for the first 6 months. Despite this initial success, however, Russia's IT industry is very limited compared to other major players. 85% of its value is accounted for by software development and data processing. Its staggering growth rate is also unlikely to continue as the initial momentum fades. The departure of Western tech giants means that Russian companies will have trouble operating systems and databases in the long term, and there is a lack of replacement of fully fledged enterprise management systems. What's more, although Russian companies have been able to replace basic solutions, there are entire sectors of the IT industry which local firms simply do not have the experience and capacity to manage.
Ukrainian authorities say they will not compel citizens who are currently abroad to return to their home country. Deputy Prime Minister Oleksiy Chernyshov said that Kyiv will be happy if Ukrainians can find success abroad.
The Ukrainian nation is incredibly divided between those who have stayed at home and those who have fled as refugees or migrated abroad. The Ukrainian government says that between 20 to 25 million Ukrainians currently live outside the country, while only 32 million remain. Despite this being a huge loss in population, Kyiv will not use any coercive measures to try to compel these people to return home. Nonetheless, Ukrainian authorities will still initiate the process of facilitating returns for those who do want to come back to Ukraine. Chernyshov, who is also the Minister of National Unity, is responsible for strengthening the institutional presence of the Ukrainian state in partner countries which have large Ukrainian minorities. The ministry is also meant to counteract any Russian propaganda meant to target Ukrainians living abroad.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.